I'm Chris Hufnagel. I'm a teaching professor in the School of Law, and today I'm going to try to keep the trains on time. So I'll be waving time cards at everyone. Other than that, let me just briefly introduce our moderator. Richard Sander is an economist and distinguished professor of law at UCLA. Since 2016, he has also been the co-director of the UCLA Rand Center on Law and Policy. His work brings empirical methods to the study of higher education, housing segregation, and court reform. He also helped to organize a heterodox academy chapter at UCLA in 2023. It's a delight to have you here, Professor Sander.
Thanks very much. Good morning. So our first panel is going to examine what the future is for DEI. Obviously, DEI grew and flourished a lot over the last decade. It's been under great challenge in recent months. The University of California announced a few weeks ago that they weren't aware that there was an official DEI policy in the hiring process at the university. So we're going to explore kind of what the status of it is and where it should be going. Part of what's exciting about today's event is that we are bringing together people from many different disciplines who all share perspectives and concerns about the university. And this panel exemplifies that. We have a mathematician, an economist, and a law professor. I'm going to briefly introduce them all. Abby Thompson is Distinguished Professor of Mathematics at UC Davis. She has degrees from Wellesley and Rutgers. Spent most of her career here at the university, mostly at Davis, but she began with a one-year stint at Berkeley. She regularly spends time at the Advanced Institute for Study at Princeton. She's co-founder of the Association for Mathematical Research. One of her areas of expertise are knots. And so I think that explains why she's interested in studying the knotty problem of DEI. Brian Soucek is professor of law and chancellor's fellow at UC Davis. He has a doctorate in philosophy from Columbia and a law degree from Yale. Much of his work is in the area of constitutional law, and he's thought and written extensively about free speech and academic freedom. He's played an active role in bodies whose concerns intersect with those we grapple with today through UC's Committee on Academic Freedom, its National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement. He was recently elected to the American Law Institute, a body which plays an outsized role in shaping the future of American law. Ethan Ligon is an economist at UC Berkeley in its Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics. He did both his undergraduate and graduate work at the University of Chicago, a school noted for its devotion to free inquiry and open expression. And he spent most of his career at Berkeley. His work ranges widely over many important topics and many countries around the world that can be loosely grouped together as applied microeconomics. So welcome, everyone. Our speakers are each going to talk for about 8 minutes, and then we're going to have some discussion among ourselves and open it up to Q&A. So, Abby?
Well, thank you. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for the kind introduction. And I'm going to start off respectfully disagreeing with Stephen Brint, our first speaker. I feel there was a strong element of it's time to circle the wagons. And I have to say, I am sorry that the federal government is directing a flamethrower towards the universities at the moment. A lot of great science is endangered. A lot of great science is going to be lost. But my God, we've been asking for it. And that wasn't part of my prepared remarks. But I think unless we really spend time figuring out why we've been asking for it and trying to figure out whether we can fix it, we really are doomed. So I'm going to talk about DEI as it has been implemented on campus. I'm not going to talk about a fantasy version of DEI that might work or, you know, the wonderful intentions behind it. I'm going to talk about DEI as it is. So the title for this panel was, What Should We Salvage from the DEI Era? I think it's the wrong question. I think the question should be, can we salvage the university from the ravages of the DEI era? Harvard is busy obscuring their DEI office. They've renamed it, as of last Tuesday, Community and Campus Life. But at UC, DEI is thriving. True, the regents have stepped in to forbid the use of DEI statements in faculty hiring, That practice was so obviously discriminatory that even UC couldn't manage to defend it, although it made a valiant effort, thanks to some people here. But with that wonderful exception, the whole vast, expensive DEI bureaucracy is flourishing. At UC Davis, it's growing like a weed. Last year, the Davis Academic Senate commissioned a report, something that Professor Brint recommended that we do. This was particularly directed to budget questions, but they asked a lot of questions about the DEI office. I found it devastating. The number of positions over the past 5 years grew from 31 to 83, and the administrative response to the report, even with the current crushing budget news, was essentially, yeah, but we've won a lot of diversity awards, and we don't have quite as many DEI staff as some comparable institutions. There's been no stepping away from the DEI strategic plan, which is to, quote, broaden the diversity of faculty and staff by ensuring that campus policies, departmental incentives, and funding models are aligned to make aggressive policy on hiring goals. And the hiring goals are very specifically based on what I would describe as cosmetic diversity. We're doubling down. Let's look at some other examples. Davis has, quote, strength through equity and diversity, or STED workshops. And just as an aside, when someone starts twisting the words around to make a sayable acronym, prepare to flee. Attending a STED workshop is required for anyone on a faculty hiring committee. These were started around 2015, when DEI was really gearing up. I objected when they were instituted on the grounds that they were addressing a non-problem. At the time, every UC Davis campus unit that was hiring, actually there was one exception, I think it was education, with one exception, were hiring women and underrepresented faculty at percentages higher than they were appearing in the applicant pools, in some cases much higher. So we have groups of faculty sitting through long and tedious sessions being told that implicit biases buried deep in their lizard brains are holding back underrepresented groups, that the way they're evaluating job files is discriminatory. Unless our lizard brains are somehow affecting the applicant pools, this is just false. The trainings do nothing for your lizard brain, nothing for the applicant pools, but they're very, very effective at conveying what are and are not acceptable opinions regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And faculty desperate for additional positions, or maybe just exhausted or afraid, go along. One of the worst consequences is that everyone is lying all the time. Hiring shortlists are rigged to pass the quota test, and we say these are the very best in the pool. We admit students to the University of California who need 2 or even 3 remedial math classes to attempt a degree in STEM, and we say these are the best qualified applicants. We promote faculty whose research consists of political diatribes, and we say they are distinguished scholars. They knew all about this in the Soviet Union. Quoting Elena Gorokova, quote, "They lie to us. We know they're lying. We know they're lying, but they keep lying to us, and we keep pretending to believe them." This has a terrible effect on the morality of the university. It's not just faculty hiring using the centralized UC recruit system foisted on us actually by Susan Carlson at UCOP. However, senior administrative hiring at the dean level and above is quite opaque. So faculty hiring they wanted to get a hold of and have all the data for, so we have UC Recruit. But you'll notice that senior administrative hiring is completely opaque. It's funneled through expensive outside headhunting firms. We don't know much about these applicant pools and how they're being winnowed down. We are typically, with apologies to administrators who are present, presented with candidates A, B, and C, who often range from bad to worse. And when faculty rank them in order, A, then B, then C, we get C. Faculty hiring has increasingly been co-opted by the administration with the ill-advised search waivers for presidents and chancellors' postdoctoral fellows, and cluster hires with specially appointed hiring committees chosen by the administration. The faculty have rolled over. Okay, I have 1 minute. DEI has also affected staff hiring. Stephen Brint did mention this. It's very significant. At UCOP, there's a anti-racism learning and reflection tool for staff review. Staff under review can range from being champions of anti-racist practices or resistors of anti-racist practices. A resistor may promote concepts such as colorblindness. Anti-racist isn't a vague idea. In 2021-22, the Davis Campus Community Book Project was Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. This is a deplorable book, but our Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion framed it, "The opportunity to welcome Dr. Kendi to campus affirms our commitment to advancing, operationalizing, and institutionalizing anti-racism at UC Davis. Institutionalized Kendiism. That's the goal of our DEI bureaucracy. DEI, as it could be, is something quite different from how it has been institutionalized at UC. It can't be salvaged in its present form. We'll get nowhere by lying about where the problems are and what the causes are and posturing about how much we care." Thank you.
Good morning. Our panel, as we just heard, was asked what we should salvage from the DEI era, which implies that there's been some sort of wreck or other disaster. In having this conversation, I think it would be productive to get some clarity about exactly where people think the calamity occurred. We'll have different conversations if people locate the wreckage in our methods of promoting DEI, in our use of diversity statements, for example, or in the bureaucratic bloat of diversity and inclusion offices, as opposed to if we see the disaster in the aim itself, the role DEI-related values are seen as playing within the mission of the University of California. Personally, I'm a pluralist when it comes to universities and their missions. The Trump administration is currently trying to leverage federal funding to dictate exactly how universities balance the values at the heart of their mission. One of the many awful effects that this would have is to impose a greater sameness across higher education. But Trump isn't alone in this. US News rankings have an enormously homogenizing effect on universities. And I see them as an enormous and hugely under-discussed threat to institutional academic freedom. Campus speech advocacy organizations like FIRE, there's an acronym, also flatten out differences by demanding that universities all adopt policies on institutional neutrality and become more like the University of Chicago. When I say that I'm a pluralist, I mean that schools should be able to make different choices about how they define and protect and talk about their values, and also how they balance values like academic freedom, freedom of expression, alongside academic expertise, non-discrimination, inclusion, diversity, at some places social mobility, maybe religious commitments, or sometimes commitments to social justice. Those are the choices that I see as producing the distinctive mission of each university, and I see no reason why those choices all need to be the same. I say all that in order to make clear that I'm not here to argue that every university in the United States needs to see diversity, equity, and inclusion as values core to its mission. But for at least 2 decades now, the University of California has done so. It's made that commitment through a process of incredibly robust shared governance, which often takes the form of a kind of wonky wordsmithing of policies like the Academic Personnel Manual. The Academic Senate began 10 years of revisions of Section 210(1)D, which defines academic merit, as far back as 2005, the same year that UC's president formed a task force on faculty diversity, whose work eventually led to a statement endorsed by the Academic Senate, the president, and in 2007, the regents, the University of California diversity statements, still in effect as Regents Policy 4400. It refers to diversity as, quote, integral to the university's achievement of excellence. So if diversity is seen as integral, not co-equal, as we heard earlier, but integral part of our teaching and research mission, then I think it only makes sense that APM 210 should recognize as components of academic merit the various ways faculty work to ensure that their teaching and research benefits a population as diverse as California's. These are ways of advancing UC's mission, and as such, they should be rewarded. To reward people who advance the university's mission in these ways, the university has to know about them. And that's how we get to diversity statements, particularly in the context of advancement, the context in which UC is still using, and in most places, still requiring them. Shared governance has also been robust here at UC on the topic of DEI statements. Joint effort between various committees of the Academic Senate and the administration led to a 2019 set of system-wide recommendations on the use of DEI statements. Unfortunately, the University Committee on Academic Freedom was not part of that drafting. So when I chaired UCAF in 2020, 2021, I pushed for revisions to the recommendations, and those were adopted in 2022. These revisions say that DEI statements should focus on actions and plans, not on beliefs, and that, like all other parts of a merit file or application, they should be developed bottom-up, not top-down, and evaluated by one's disciplinary peers. There shouldn't be a single right answer to a diversity statement, any more than there is to a teaching statement or a research agenda. There are better and worse ones, to be sure, but the quality of someone's contributions in any of these areas needs to be judged according to the needs of their field, and those needs vary widely across the university. Now, since, as we've heard, diversity statements have been framed and used in so many different ways, some far more problematic than others, perhaps we could just focus for a moment on one that I would be willing to defend. I don't take this as doing a fantasy version of DEI. I think this as part of a project of actually engaging with what would it mean to do things the right way. Here's one. Ask faculty, what work have you done or what plans have you made to advance those aspects of the university's mission described in Regents Policy 4400? Instead of general statements of belief, please focus on diversity-related challenges or shortcomings that you have identified within your specific discipline, research area, or classes, and describe what you have done or plan to do to address those problems. Now, in past work of mine and in a book that I have coming out called The Opinionated University, Chicago's publishing later this year, I argue at great length why I don't think a prompt like that should count as a loyalty oath, why it doesn't violate academic freedom or the Constitution's prohibition on viewpoint discrimination. Instead of repeating all those arguments in my brief time here, I want instead to push this audience to consider whether those are the questions that they actually care about. Most of the people I've debated over the years about diversity statements have insisted that diversity is itself a valuable goal. In their words, we just shouldn't require pledges of allegiance to advance that value. If that's your position, diversity is valuable, diversity statements bad, then I think it would be very productive to hear some of your ideas for advancing that value and doing so without knowing about and recognizing the myriad ways that individual faculty work to advance it in their everyday teaching, research, and other professional activities. I'm also eager to know if, and if so, why, you think our system's evolving use of diversity statements deserves total abandonment. After all, here at UC, we rely even more heavily on other ways of evaluating faculty merit, and here I'm thinking of student teaching evaluations, which decades of empirical studies have shown to have disparate impacts based on race, gender, political opinion, and even appearance. They have demonstrated to distort what professors feel willing to teach in their classes. And they're a primary contributor to grade inflation, which is a genuine dilution of academic standards. These are the exact academic freedom-related complaints generally raised against diversity statements. And so the absence of a discussion at this conference, like every other, of these kinds of threats make me wonder, is it really the method, the diversity statements people object to? Or is the worry the ultimate aim, diversity, equity, and inclusion? Fine if so, if the latter, that opens up a very different debate for us to have. My only caution in entering into that debate is that we not beg the question at issue there. as, for example, the American Enterprise Institute did when it titled its report on diversity statements, "Other Than Merit." Those who oppose diversity can't just help themselves to a notion of neutrality that simply assumes teaching and research excellence are abstracted from questions about what populations benefit from that teaching and research. Now, to close, when people have these debates, I just want to make it clear, it should go without saying, but it doesn't, that people's speech for and against these issues, their intramural speech, their extramural speech, categorically must be protected and is protected under UC's academic freedom policies. Now, that doesn't mean people should necessarily be having these debates in their diversity statements themselves, any more than I should be talking about how I'd like a reduction in my teaching load in my teaching statements. I should be doing that in the academic senate. I should be writing op-eds in the Wall Street Journal speaking out against that. There are plenty of ways I should be up here using my microphone at this conference to do so, as opposed to within the statements itself. But anytime, any questions we might have challenging the UC's commitment, even if the commitment requires us to do our job in a certain way, the ability to speak out against that understanding of our job, I hope we're all agreed here, needs to be categorically protected under academic freedom. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian. Ethan.
So I'm in a fortunate position in a way of going last on this panel. Both Abby and Brian are people who have staked out well-known public positions on DEI topics. I'm not. I'm more like everyman Berkeley professor who has to deal with the consequences of policies related to the DEI and its implementation, particularly on the Berkeley campus. I still have ideas and some reactions, I guess, to some of what Abby and Brian have said. The notion of this panel was to think about what could be salvaged from DEI, and I believe the acronym is in the title of the panel. We didn't unpack it into diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think I'll do that unpacking a little bit, just to think clearly about these issues myself. I'm going to go backward. So what should we salvage from a notion of inclusion? Do we want inclusion? I think that's right. I think we'd like everyone in the campus community to feel as though they're a valued member of the community. I think most specifically, people shouldn't feel as if they say something, they might be excluded or canceled for doing so. So inclusion is a very important sort of value that I think we should definitely keep. People should have voice on campus. We should be allowed to express what we think without fear of being punished for it or being canceled for it. That's inclusion. I won't say much more about it. Equity. I'm a Chicago economist, really at heart. I'm a big fan of equality of opportunity. When people talk about equity, I always have to figure out what they mean exactly. It seems to depend a lot on the circumstance. The examples people give, I went and looked on Berkeley's diversity, diversity.berkeley.edu to see what they had to say about equity. And they give a sort of notion of it really by example. You know, if two people are giving a talk, or perhaps sitting at a panel, and one of them's shorter than the other, maybe they should get a stool to stand on. That's equity, whereas equality would make the short person stand on the same level as other people. That sounds like a really contrived example, frankly. I don't think it's realistic to think about trying to guarantee equality of outcomes, which is what I think some people might mean by equity. I study equality myself in my professional capacity as an economist. I think that most people, including the Vice Chancellor of Equity and Inclusion here at Berkeley, probably don't really have a very firm idea of what equity means. I don't want to talk about that either. So I'll talk more about diversity. So what do I think about diversity? First, we've already seen, I think, on this panel, the word seems to mean quite different things to different people. For some people, and certainly some people here at Berkeley, it's basically a code word for affirmative action. So when Prop 209 was passed in 1996, the university was no longer allowed to condition admission for undergraduates or hiring decisions on sex or on race or on ethnicity. And so the university wanted to sort of promote those people, so it looked for things that were correlated with race and sex, and landed on a sort of set of things that they could look for. That's one idea. So a euphemism for race or sex. That still happens in hiring decisions for faculty now. If you, when I did this most recently, if you try to hire people and go to a short list, you're very quickly reminded about the composition of the applicant pool on some dimensions, the dimensions of sex and ethnicity, and you're very strongly encouraged to make sure that whatever the next step in the hiring process is matches those sort of benchmarks. It's also a possible signal that one subscribes to a particular set of progressive platitudes. We see this a lot in our hiring decisions and in our graduate students we admit to our PhD program, for example. The DEI statements or the personal statements now that our most successful graduate students, our most promising applicants submit, all look remarkably the same. For our PhD students who are incoming, they've certainly thought hard about the demographic challenges facing economics. They've probably founded an NGO, or they're a director someplace helping people in Africa with skin color different than that of their own. They all really look remarkably the same. Not exactly diverse. So what's the argument for diversity here? A really good argument? Well, I turn to the Berkeley Principles Community, which I'm kind of a fan of. They were merged in 2015. One of the principles, there's 7 of them, is we recognize the intrinsic relationship between diversity and excellence in all of our endeavors. Okay, I agree with that, I think. I recognize that there's a relationship. It need not be a causal relationship, let's say. It's not necessarily the case that by pushing on the string of diversity, we increase the excellence of our research or our teaching. I'll turn also to the sentence from the Calvin Report. A university, if it is to be true to its faith in intellectual inquiry, must embrace, be hospitable to, and encourage the widest diversity of views within its own community. I totally agree with that. I agree with both of those positions. I think diversity is very important. I think it's important in the hiring decisions we make as a faculty. I think it's important in the students we admit to our graduate programs. I think it's valuable when we think about the undergraduates who admit. Those are all really important things. Really, really much too important to be left to a bunch of bean counters. The sort of horror stories that go along with complying with DEI rules at Berkeley when we're making hiring decisions or admitting PhD students are really just, I won't dwell on them because I don't have time. Perhaps we can come back to some of them in the comments, but it's really been ugly having to deal with the rubric in the past at Berkeley to hire people. It means that people have to lie. It means that people have to be unprincipled when you make these kinds of decisions. Okay, so what should we do in terms of trying to think about promoting the kind of diversity that I think is valuable? Again, I don't think this is not a string we should be pushing on. It's something we should value as a natural outcome of the scholarly enterprise we're engaged in. We're better equipped to think good thoughts if we have smart people to argue with coming from different points of view. We can condition on characteristics, sex and race. That's very crude, though, also illegal in California now. We could use a richer set of characteristics. Here, I like the idea of using a richer set of characteristics. I'm in a Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics. Many of us study agriculture. We're very carefully balanced now by sex and by ethnic URMs. I think I'm the only faculty member who grew up on a farm, who has a rural background at all, in a Department of Agricultural Economics. Everyone else is now a city kid. You start to think, that's my own personal experience. There's lots of other characteristics that might matter for a scholarly enterprise, though, whether it's where you're coming from, rural or urban, whether it's the region of the country, your religious background, your sex, your race. There's a whole long list of things. Now, people on the progressive left are aware of this. They call this intersectionality. So the fact that I'm a white male from a rural area distinguishes me in important ways from a white male from an urban area in a way that's important. We can't take that into account because that number of categories is simply too large. So we can't allow the bean counters to keep track of all these little minutiae and make us conform to this sort of matching the population averages here. And I guess with that I'm out of time, so I'll stop there.
Okay, we're going to do a little discussion among ourselves. I'm going to ask each of the panelists a question. Why don't we try to keep our questions and answers short so that we can get through a number of them, and why don't each of you feel free to comment on the answers of the others. So Abby, do you think that there needs to be affirmative efforts to foster intellectual diversity at UC, and if so, how would you go about doing that?
I think actually that's it's difficult to do unless you eliminate the filter that we have on intellectual diversity. That is, I think that the conformity that we're seeing amongst the faculty politically and intellectually is because of the policies that we have in place. So my feeling is that if we remove those, if we remove the requirement that you write a statement which says, I firmly believe in the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is what they say, I think you'll automatically open it up to intellectual diversity. So I'm not in favor of, some kind of affirmative action for conservatives, for example. They'll occur. They used to be here. So.
Okay. Any comments on that?
I agree with that. I mean, I think that's the reason to be making clear, as clearly as we possibly could, that I don't want to hear your beliefs when it comes to your diversity statement. I really couldn't care less whether you're for it, whether you're against it. I want to know, about this NGO in Africa. One of them can be purely made up. That's the lying problem. I think diversity is the greatest thing in the world. Same way that I think, teaching is the thing that gives me the most meaning in life, something like that. Well, fine. What were your scores like? How many students did you teach? What did you do to innovate your syllabus? Like, that's what we actually care about. I think just a strong statement that that's not what we care about could have some of the effects that Abby would like.
Mm-hmm. You have a response? Okay.
The problem is that the way the system is set up, particularly with respect to diversity statements, is that the people who are considering them are specifically rewarded for the demographic diversity of the applicant pool that they come up with. So it's fine to say that's not what we should be looking at, but in fact, that is what the administration in particular seems to be looking at.
In which case, that's what we should change.
So that ties into the question I have for you, Brian. Ethan suggests that diversity is often, or DEI is often a code word for racial or gender affirmative action. Now, I've studied Davis Law School's law student admissions closely, and I'm convinced that it operates in many ways as a process of race norming, where preferences are set roughly at the level that's going to produce equal yields among every racial group. Do you think that is how these faculty hiring processes are effectively working, and do you see the DEI as essentially being a synonym for affirmative action?
No, I think, and I both think, and the STED program that Abby was talking about explicitly, one of its reasons is to teach faculty what I'm about to say, which is that in the use of, say, diversity statements in hiring, no credit should be given to somebody's identity characteristic. The use of somebody might, however, talk about their identity characteristic in the exact same way the Supreme Court just said is permissible, as you all know, in the context of college admissions, as a grounds of, this is something that's led to these kinds of experiences in my life, and that has helped shape this type of character or led me to do these kinds of activities. Somebody doesn't have to cut that out. That's how the majority opinion ends in the Harvard-UNC cases. We don't have to ignore that or be blind to that. It's just that the use of race there has to be part of a broader story that's told about how race has affected character or experiences. And that's either what we are doing or, if not, what I would want us to be doing in the context of, in the use of diversity statements within faculty hiring.
Ethan, you mentioned that in complying with the DEI bureaucracy's policies requirements, you find it necessary, people find it necessary to say things that aren't true. Can you give an example of that?
I can give examples. I could do a little bit better because I don't want to accuse anyone of lying, but I can tell you of examples of people who applied and didn't lie. I'll give two examples, both from searches that I chaired. One of those searches involved an economist who, in his diversity statement, said things that were sensible. He said, I grew up in rural France. I identified as a gay person. I'm a gay economist. That's part of my identity. But I do not believe that I should be required to write this statement, and I think that I should treat everyone in the classroom equally. He was using the scoring rubric that we were given by OFU here at Berkeley. He would have been immediately kicked out of the pool. He triggered several little triggers there that would have given him the lowest possible score on this rubric that we were essentially required to use. And he wound up, in fact, not being in the pool. Another example. This was someone who eventually did hire. A economist who had grown up in Africa. He was a black African, but he'd grown up in a different culture than ours. And in his DEI statements, he said things that ran afoul of OFU's beliefs about what he should believe or express about both racial and sexual matters. He would have been kicked out of the pool, except for the fact that this is so obviously stupid that if we're trying to increase diversity, we're kicking the only black applicant out of the pool. And so we pushed really hard back on that and made that stop. So yeah, these kinds of, and there's another search which I wasn't on, which I was not chairing, but again, one of the most actually diverse applicants, even on these criteria of sex and race, was being kicked out of the pool because they were expressing incorrect beliefs. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. All right, let's have general Q&A. Please keep your questions concise and actual questions. Yes.
Hi, Clayton Null, UCSB. I want to address this question of actions versus beliefs in the DEI statements. Now, of course, I think it makes sense to judge people by the actions in the classroom and in their research program. In practice, I think these actions are being used as a test of ideological compliance. For example, the types of actions that are rewarded are things like being active in particular types of activist-oriented equity organizations or groups or caucuses within the faculty, which are effectively just a revealed preference of a revelation of your ideology, your ideological commitments. In assessing actions, I don't think we need to just be assessing what people are actually doing, but whether what they're doing is actually effective. For example, in the classroom, there's pretty significant differences in preparation of students. If I adopt some sort of colorblind approach to that in practice, like say if I do a randomized study and that colorblind approach actually helps students from diverse backgrounds, shouldn't that be rewarded? Well, the way that these statements are actually judged would actually lead to me not being rewarded for that sort of work. So where are we actually testing the effectiveness of all these DEI interventions, and which ones are we actually rewarding?
That's super. I would hope that would be rewarded in the same, so the Berkeley rubric has caused, talk about something that shouldn't be salvaged. It's caused so much problems, and one of the main parts of it is the idea that treating students the same is automatically something bad. Sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's good. When I get exams next week, I'll grade them anonymously. All of my colleagues do as well. We grade everything anonymously, except class participation, obviously. That's treating everyone the same, and it's wonderfully effective. I think other things. I think my view of equity, for example, is that not that everybody needs to come out the same, but that if there are racial differences or gender differences in how people are thriving in my classes, I at the very least need to be giving some hard thought to why that is so, and if there's anything I can be doing to make it less so. That's how I personally think of equity. And so your experimentation in what would work there is, to me at least, exactly what I would want.
I want to leap in here on Brian's remarks about equity here. I'm an economist. The way I would think about this problem of having people in the classroom, some of whom are flourishing less than others, is not one of equity at all. My goal in the classroom is not to make everyone wind up with the same grade at the end of the day. Instead, it's to devote resources to where they'll be best used. And so if there's something I can do to help, if there's something that affects women in the classroom or some other identifiable group, then maybe I'll take steps to try to make that better. We've done that in my department by emphasizing it 15 years ago, the hiring of women faculty members, because we felt like PhD students would value having female mentors, for example. But that's a decision that's being made, in that case, by our department for efficiency reasons, not equity reasons. We're trying to produce better outcomes for all of our students, not to try to produce equal outcomes.
Thank you. Susan.
Susan? Susan Mazer, also from UCSB. I want to know what you thought about what I think are 4 under-the-radar components of the wreckage that weren't mentioned. First, I want to say what Abby said. So the first under-the-radar component is the rise of the activist scholar and their adulation by many people on campus. I think it's going to be really hard to counter this wave because people who've been hired on this basis, from assistant to full professors in the last decade, their effects on university life are going to cascade for the next 40 years as their careers continue. And so I don't know how to mute that. The second component I wanted to raise is simply the suppression of discussion, or even raising the question, at least in my department, as to whether there are good versus bad ways to implement the motives of DEI. In my department, if you even raise a question, your loyalty to the DEI cause, the label of being an ally, is taken out from you immediately. The third component is the focus on protecting speech really what we're after? Is that it's necessary, but is it sufficient? In other words, we know that even young children are exquisitely skilled at punishing their peers for some infraction. Adults are champions of this skill, and moreover, they can cryptically, they can hide their punishments by simply, undermining their peers' promotions or simply their good ideas. It doesn't take active, overt punishment that everybody can see. All it takes is well, so what? Maybe her research isn't so great. And then finally, to refer back to something that Steve Brent said earlier, I think that part of the wreckage is this focus on practical research contributions of universities, and as Brian put it, our direct contributions to the population of California. That's high-minded, and I can see how that view would be really popular, but what I would argue is that a critical prerequisite for these material achievements of research is research that's totally unfettered by the likelihood of improving human welfare. Blue sky research, discovery research, however it's abbreviated.
Susan, we have to stop in like 45 seconds.
Okay, sorry. There are no institutions other than universities that provide a means and resources to discovery research. We're the astronauts of intellectual life, trying to propel human intellectual achievements into new galaxies. I've never met an undergraduate who understood that, at least before they fell into my clutches. And I think that that is the message we also need to convey to the broader public.
All right, I'm going to treat that as a comment rather than a question because we're out of time. Thanks, everyone. And Brian, I appreciate you bringing intellectual diversity to this panel.
My pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Sander. And in the interest of